What chance of peace now? The Israeli army's launched its biggest attack on Palestinians in months, and the Israeli coalition is falling apart. Can 2008 really be the year a deal is reached? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm David Foster. Dozens killed or injured by Israelis in the Gaza Strip just days after President Bush arrived to play peacemaker. A slap in the face for US peace efforts. Amid the furore, a key Israeli cabinet minister resigns in protest over talks with the Palestinians. Are we back to square one? And what's next? Another Israeli incursion into Gaza and more bloodshed that's left at least 19 Palestinians dead. Israeli tanks, troops and helicopters attacked the Gaza Strip on Tuesday in the deadliest attack since Hamas took over the area in July of last year. Israel said it was after militants who'd been firing rockets into the southern part of the country, but the damaged buildings included a school. In Gaza, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh said the deaths would boost the Palestinians' resolve.
This bloodshed will only strengthen our quest to claim our rights. We will not give up on Jerusalem. We will not surrender the right of the return of our refugees. And we will not give up on Palestine.
And speaking to Al Jazeera, an Israeli government official said the attacks were a defensive action against Palestinian militants who regularly fire rockets into Israeli towns bordering Gaza.
Obviously, no one wants to see death or destruction. But the Israeli operations are defensive. We are responding to violence perpetrated against our people, and you have to make a clear distinction here. The Palestinian terrorist extreme groups are shooting indiscriminately.
On Tuesday, a Palestinian sniper killed an Ecuadorian working in an Israeli farming community, and fighting between the two sides continues. The violence comes just days after US President George Bush visited the area. He met the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and the Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and said he was confident of peace between the two sides by the end of 2008. Abbas hasn't walked away from the current final status talks that are supposed to lead to that peace, but he condemned the attacks as going against the nature of talks with Israel.
Today there is a massacre against Palestinian citizens. We tell the whole world, Israel and all the people, that we cannot remain silent on such crimes, and it will never, under any circumstances, lead to peace.
But with ongoing fighting between Israelis and Palestinians, it's difficult to see how the sides might be able to negotiate any kind of peace. Joining us to discuss the latest developments in Gaza and Israel, our guests from Tel Aviv, Dan Shifton, a senior research fellow at the National Security Studies Centre at the University of Haifa. In London, Abdul Bari Atwan, editor-in-chief of Al-Quds Al-Arabi newspaper, and in Washington, D.C., Phyllis Bennis, director of the new Internationalism Project at the Institute for Policy Studies. Phyllis Bennis, let me start with you first of all, and I'll put the same question to each one of our guests at the start of this programme. Mr. Bush has made it clear what he wants his legacy to be, peace in his time. Is it possible now?
I don't think it's possible. Peace depends on ending occupation, stopping the kind of discriminatory policies that have characterized the Israeli occupation and discrimination inside Israel, the denial of right of return for the refugees. All of these things were endorsed by President Bush. And in fact, he didn't even say there will be a peace treaty in his term, before his term ends at the end of this year. He said there should be a definition of a Palestinian state. That's actually a pretty low bar. He changed his language. He spoke in language that reflects some parts of international law. What he didn't do was change any of the U.S.'s real policies towards settlement, refugees, Jerusalem, any of the other critical issues that would be required for real peace.
Dan Shifton in Tel Aviv, what's your thoughts? Just a couple of days after Mr. Bush said what he said, and we see what the Israelis and the Palestinians are doing to each other again. Is it possible?
No, it isn't, and it never was. And the logic of the Annapolis process has very little to do with the Palestinians. It is basically an Israeli-American understanding that Israel should seriously try to reach a settlement with the Palestinians, so that the Americans can get a coalition against Iran. This is the motivation. Every sensible person who knows the first thing about the Middle East knows that the chances of peace between Israel and the Palestinians have been zero, are zero, and will be zero for the foreseeable future. The gap is simply unbridgeable. What the Palestinians want is that Israel will commit demographic suicides through the right of return. There isn't the slightest chance that the Israelis will even seriously consider this absurd notion of the Palestinians. The Palestinians are committed to terrorism on a very high level and can do very little about it. Under these circumstances, the chances are zero, and the Israelis will have to go back to unilateral steps.
So that's a no from Washington, D.C., a no from Tel Aviv. Abdul Bari Atwan, what are your thoughts?
Well, to be honest, I couldn't disagree with your guests. I believe the chances not only zero, I believe it is -0. I think the whole region is drifting toward war, and always when the American would like to launch a war, they go to the Palestinian questions, present themselves as a peacemaker, but their eyes actually on Iran. And I think this kind of incursion in Gaza, the massacres committed by the Israeli forces, will enhance the radicalism among the Palestinians, discredit the moderate elements like Mahmoud Abbas, and I believe this actually could add more trouble to the whole region, not just to the Gaza and the West Bank. So to be honest, I cannot see any peace on the table. I can see a lot of bloodshed, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Israeli are planning now for a wider incursion in Gaza, and this could be, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of people will be massacred in this, war if it is going to happen.
Yeah, do you believe the Israelis are trying to provoke a major confrontation? And if so, would that be Olmert's plan, or would it be from others, more extreme elements within his administration?
To be honest, I believe the Israelis are planning for a wide-scale incursion in Gaza. And when I heard that President Bush is coming back to the region next May, so it means the Israeli, this is my understanding, the Israeli could actually go into Gaza and try to root out Hamas forever, and then to say to President Bush, yes, now we get rid of Hamas, we can go ahead with the peace talks with Abbas according to President Bush's vision, which is no right of return, no Jerusalem, adjustment of the border, and actually sort of a very symbolic Palestinian state without any sovereignty.
Phyllis Bennett in Washington, D.C., what will President Abbas be thinking at the moment about any attacks that limit the hold of Hamas on Gaza? Will he be, as he's put himself out to be in the public, outraged by what he's seen, or will, in a sense, he be happy to see Hamas reign back in this way?
Well, I think that the Hamas position has been so much the centerpiece of the crisis that has emerged in Gaza, where you have a kind of collective punishment that has made 1.5 million people they're being held hostage in what amounts to an open-air prison, with the entire Gaza Strip controlled by Israel, the air is controlled, the seas, the Gaza fishermen's fleet cannot catch fish where they want. All of it is controlled by Israel, and this has provided an escalating humanitarian crisis, a political crisis, where Mahmoud Abbas cannot speak for Fatah, for Gaza. He cannot speak for the elected parliament, which of course has a
I know, but my question, if you don't mind, if we can come back to that, will President Abbas privately not be unhappy to see Hamas's power being limited by what Israel's doing, or will he be, as he said he is, outraged?
I think he's outraged as a human being, as anyone would be. Whether he's secretly politically pleased as well, I'm not going to try and speculate on that. I think what's more important, and both of my colleagues have indicated this already, is what is really at stake here is not just the issue of Gaza. Unfortunately, Gaza is a sideshow to the broader regional question, which has everything to do with Iran. I actually think that a massive Israeli strike on Gaza is somewhat less likely right now, not because Israel isn't perfectly content to do it, regardless of humanitarian consequences, as has been clear in the past, but because they are negotiating formally or informally with the Bush administration about who will take the lead in escalating even military attacks on Iran. It was clear from the beginning that Bush's trip was first and foremost designed to reassure Israel that despite the finding of the National Intelligence Estimate, claiming that quite clearly that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, does not have an active nuclear weapons program, that has nothing to do with the Bush policy, and that in fact Bush is operating as if Iran was indeed the kind of threat that Israel claims it is.
Let me take
That's
some of
the
those
basis
points.
here.
Let me take some of those points to Tel Aviv, Dan Shifton, for us there. If this is the case, as put forward by Phyllis Bennis and to a certain extent by Barry Atwan, what are Abbas and Olmert up to?
Well, first of all, you must understand that Abbas cannot even represent himself. Abbas is a rumor. Abbas is a hologram. He cannot even control what is happening in Ramallah, let alone in the West Bank, let alone in the Gaza Strip. He is completely impotent. He has no power whatsoever. He cannot, even if he wanted to, control Palestinian terrorism against Israel, and he is totally worthless. Now, he is good for ceremonies, and this is what we've had in Jerusalem. If you had an interlocutor on the Palestinian side who was willing to discuss a historic compromise, then the Israelis are more than eager to get into this kind of compromise. The reason that Lieberman left the government is that the government is discussing the most sensitive issues that the very existence of Israel depends on, because the Israeli government wants a compromise.
Well, I'm going to get into the resignation of Avigdor Lieberman in the second part of this programme, if we may, Mr. Shifton. So I'll take one of your points and put it to Barry Atwan in London, editor of Al-Quds newspaper. President Abbas, not described there in glowing terms by our colleague in Tel Aviv. What do you think?
Well, I believe he's right. Yeah, I think Abbas, he's not in control of his organization, Fatah. Also, he is not in control of Gaza Strip, and he is not supported by the Arab leaders as his previous Yasser Arafat used to be supported. And the man is completely powerless. He is just like, caretaker president. He tried to keep the name of the PLO. He is actually consuming time, and he cannot take major decision vis-a-vis the final status settlement. So I think he will continue meeting Olmert between now and then, and also in order to please the American, to get the money flowing to his authority, to pay the salaries of his people or the people around him. That's all. But when it comes to the crux of the matters, the settlement, the painful concessions, as President Bush said, I don't believe Abbas has anything to offer to the Israelis simply because he's penniless. He has nothing to concede anymore. The same thing on the other side, we have the Israeli Prime Minister, who is a lame duck again, who is not well supported by the Israeli people. Now Lieberman, with his 11th members of the parliament, pull out of this government. So maybe other people will join him in this. So I think both sides are very weak, and the atmosphere in the whole region is not atmosphere of peace. It is atmosphere of war. So, we cannot have peace in Palestine and war in Iraq, and we cannot have peace in Palestine and vacuum in Lebanon, and we cannot have peace in Palestine whilst President Mubarak of Egypt is disenchanted with the United States. So you can see the region is not actually prepared for peace. It is prepared for anarchy, more stress, more wars maybe.
And we try to fit all of this into half an hour. We're doing our best at the moment. A very depressing picture painted by all three of you, I have to say. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll be discussing, amongst other things, the resignation of Avigdor Lieberman, mentioned there, and the ruling coalition in Israel that he was part of. What chances for peace without the right-wingers? And as our guests have suggested, what chance for peace at all under any circumstances? We'll discuss that when we come back. Do stay with us if you can.